This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then notes on resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month.
We get compassion fatigue because you hear too much, you see too much, and then it becomes another domestic, it becomes another shooting call. And you can lose that compassion, and that's something that we have to guard against and practice resiliency and learn how to be resilient and how to survive so we can maintain compassion when we need it.
Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. My guest today is Tony Harrison. He's the founder of the Public Safety Group and has a long history in public safety, including working as a dispatcher and as a deputy sheriff. We talked about resiliency and treating it, the aftermath of trauma versus trying to prevent people from feeling traumatized. And he said one of my new favorite phrases, which is talk it out or you will act it out. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Tony. Thanks so much. And find us on Apple Podcasts. And if you like what you hear, we'd love for you to subscribe and leave a review. And if you'd like to help us shape the podcast for the future, we've got a form that I'd love to get your feedback, just a few questions. There's a link to that in the show notes. Thanks so much. Hi, Tony. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Well, before we learn a little bit more about who you are, I would like to know if you could have any superpower, what would that be?
That would be to fly.
Oh, how come?
I used to have these dreams years ago of me not really flying, but more like gliding through the air. I didn't have the ability to propel, but I was gliding. So yeah, I'd like to fly.
I love that one. There's such a sense of freedom in
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And now we just want to know, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, I'm Tony Harrison. I work in public safety. Started my career when I was very young as a dispatcher, call taker at a very small agency in Oklahoma, a very affluent community, a place called Nichols Hills, working a midnight shift. And it was before we even had 911. So it was just taking emergency calls and dispatching those. Worked there for a number of years and did other things in other agencies at 911 centers. Went to another city outside of Oklahoma City called Midwest City. There we dispatched police, fire, and medical. Spent a few years there. And then a good part of my time is at Oklahoma City Police Department and the police department dispatching there and ended up being a supervisor. I've also worked 20 plus years as a part-time deputy sheriff for a sheriff's office.
Okay.
And now I own the Public Safety Group, and we do dispatcher training all across the United States.
Oh, wow. You have public safety in the blood. What was it that got you interested in public safety when you first started?
I was in high school and I filled out, one of these career surveys that sometimes they have you do. And then after that, one of these departments reached out to me, the Nichols Hills Police Department. They were forming an Explorer post, which is part of the Boy Scouts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, sure, and and they do a lot of education and how police departments work, and did a lot of schooling. And part of that was allowed to work in dispatch along one of their dispatchers and learn about dispatching.
Hmm.
So I did that, when I was 16, 17. And when I turned 18, they offered me a part-time job
Oh, wow.
filling other people's shifts. I was still in high school and I was working at the police department as a dispatcher. So, and then shortly after graduation, I went full time.
Wow. That's great. And I imagine you have heard it all in these calls that you have gotten.
Yeah, it's over the years, it's thousands and tens of thousands of
Yeah.
calls. We didn't get many when I worked at Nichols Hills. Obviously, it was a very small town, but you throw in a good many years at Oklahoma City,
Yeah.
a major city, and you get it all. And then spending a lot of time out as a deputy and at the sheriff's office, we did a little bit of everything from patrol to courtroom to civil to
Mhm.
prisoner transport to mental health transports, you name it. So you get a wide wide variety there as well.
You do. You've had an opportunity to see people on their worst day, on their second worst day, maybe some folks on their best days too. What do you think about the word resilience?
I think it's the ability to bounce back,
Mhm.
the ability to absorb, the ability to move on.
Mhm.
Those are the words that kind of come to me, the definition that comes to me.
Okay. Now you are a consultant these days, but you did a lot of work on the front lines as a dispatcher, for example. And I would think that resiliency is a key trait that one might need as a dispatcher, given the kinds of traumas and difficult situations you are learning about. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And so many of us, we think of the trauma coming when we are adults,
Mhm.
but so many people, it doesn't start then.
Mhm.
It starts a lot earlier, and people seek out careers where they can help or stuff like that. So very few of us in public safety come in a blank slate. Nobody comes in a blank slate. We already have our own experiences and past.
Right.
And then you throw on a life of public safety, and so many people like me, you're not just doing one thing; you're doing two jobs, three jobs, and so many people like me, and it's in high stress areas. I don't take
Yes.
a part time job doing something very low stress. You pick another very high stress area where you're exposed to even more
Mhm.
trauma.
Yeah, high stress, I think about those kind of jobs as a dispatcher or a first responder as well. Many of the public safety positions, I would imagine, are incredibly high stress, and that resiliency is an important skill to be having, and compassion is an important skill to be nurturing as well.
Yeah, and there was a term I learned about several years ago called compassion fatigue, and
Mhm.
so many of us in helping professions, we get compassion fatigue because you hear too much, you see too much,
Mhm.
and then it becomes another domestic, it becomes another shooting call, and you can lose that compassion, and that's something that we have to guard against and practice resiliency and learn how to be resilient and how to survive so we can maintain compassion
Right.
when we need it.
Wow. Compassion fatigue, that's something I've heard that term before. What can someone in public safety or a helping profession like you do, like you're in, do to prevent or at least mitigate the impact of compassion fatigue?
Learn about it, know the symptoms. Compassionfatigue.org is a website that I learned about years ago, and we have to see it. And I think it was originally found in nurses,
Mhm.
but we see it in these other professions. But lucky, I had people that knew a lot about mental health. We didn't necessarily call it that in the day,
Mhm.
but the Oklahoma City Police Department had a peer support program 30 years ago.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and I got involved in that early on, And it helped tremendously when events did happen.
Mhm.
I had knowledge to know about what to expect.
Mhm.
I had learned some coping tools and mechanisms that have helped me a lot along the way.
Mhm.
And I want to do some more teaching on, especially to our younger professionals,
Mhm.
how to avoid it. What can you do? So instead of teaching people what to do once they have it,
Yes.
let's prevent the disease. Let's don't treat it. Well, we need to treat it. Let's treat it for those that have it, but let's give people the tools to prevent it when it's possible. It's not always going to be possible, but
Right, right,
if we can prevent the disease, we don't have to treat the disease. You don't have
right.
to deal with it. And you have people that like me, that I'm going to be exposed to incidences. So I should get this training early in my career
Mhm.
so I can take care of myself. But you do have so many people that probably listen to this podcast that they're in a profession where all of a sudden they, or in life, it may not be their profession, but in their life, something has come along and now they've been traumatized by it, and it's not a part of their work. It's not
Right,
supposed to be part of their life. You probably are a great example of that. you
right.
know um
Surprise.
yeah, you're going about your normal day, minding your own business, trying to have fun, and bingo bango, all of a sudden you're in the middle of this.
Yeah,
So then it becomes learning the tools how to become a survivor
right,
after it does happen.
right. So you mentioned earlier on you were talking about trauma, that a lot of folks in the helping profession may have some trauma in their background, and that might be one of the reasons they're in a helping profession. And then certainly in public safety, you're dealing with other people's trauma, which is also traumatizing to you. What do you think that people misunderstand about the concept of trauma?
Oh, wow. I was at a conference just this week, and one of the keynote speakers says, we choose to pick up the stress, and you can
Mhm.
choose to put it down. Now,
Mhm.
I believe he's right when it comes to everyday stresses, driving to work, the memo my boss sends me. I think he's right on about that. But when it comes to trauma, something happened to me. I didn't choose to pick it up,
Mhm.
but I do believe we can choose to put it down.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean it's easy,
Mhm.
but and this may be kind of deviating from your question. I'm a believer that all of us are victims of something.
Okay.
Somewhere in our life, we become a victim of something. Maybe it's divorce, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Bad parents, good parents. Traffic accident, whatever. We're a victim,
Mhm.
and if it's something easy, it's easy to become a survivor of that.
Mhm.
But I also believe that there are some things that are so traumatizing that I have to make a conscious decision sometimes that this happened. I was a victim of that, but now I have to become a survivor of that.
Mhm.
And for some of us, it is a conscious decision, because some of us do live as victims all our life of that event.
Mhm.
I never can get past the divorce. I can never get past, we didn't talk about it yet, but I was on duty at the 911 center when the Oklahoma City bombing happened.
Wow, okay.
And for some of your younger listeners, it's hard to believe it's been 25 plus years. So some of them may not have been alive. 168 people were killed, 19 children were killed when one person bombed the Alfred Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And I was talking to somebody that lost his mom in it a number of years later, and he had a sister, and he had become a survivor of it,
Mhm.
becoming a survivor of losing his mom in this terrorist incident. But he said his sister was still living in it. She hadn't been able to find what I call my new sense of normalcy. Okay.
Mhm.
After trauma, and you probably had this question 100 times in your own experiences. Are things back to normal? Are things back to
Yes.
normal?
Yes.
One of the most frequent questions. And I used to answer it all the time. Yes, things are back to normal. The sun comes up, I go to work, the sun sets, or the sun sets, I was still at work. Uh,
Yes.
because by then I was working the 3 p.m. to 11 shift. Things are normal. But then it took me a long time to realize I can't go back to the way it was
Yes.
when I woke up on April 19th at
Mhm.
7 o'clock in the morning.
Mhm.
I can't go back to the way it was at 9 o'clock that morning because something happened at 9:02 that changed me,
Right.
and it changed me forever.
Yeah.
And sometimes I want to go back. Well, you can't.
Yeah.
It's gone. I can't go back to the way it was when my grandmother was alive. She's
Yeah.
gone. But I can find my new sense of normalcy. And I think, that sometimes is easier
Mhm.
for others. I think for some people, it has to be a conscious decision, sometimes weeks later, sometimes years later.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, this happened. However traumatizing and horrible it happened. But now I've got to live my life. I've got to find my new sense of normalcy.
Yes. And I can tell you that in my experience, the first time I heard somebody say the new normal, I just hated those words together. I just, I also hated the word resiliency when I first heard it too. So it was more about where I was in the process than what those mean.
Yeah, but I really appreciate your interpretation, because I haven't heard someone hasn't said that to me. And I'm sure you're not the first one I've said that they've been highly offended by it or pissed off by it.
Though, Tony, I think it was, for me, I think it was just anger in general at the whole situation. And the words and those concepts were things I could grab onto. They were things people were telling me, oh, you're going to get back to your new normal, or you are resilient, or you're tapping into your resiliency. Those were things that were kind of easy targets to get angry with, and now I realize, especially the concept of new normal, I just realize that our version of normal is shifting all the time with the things that are happening with us. But it's only when something big happens that we feel that break, I think,
Yeah,
with our previous version.
yeah. I think I like one of the things you said about, sometimes we're not ready for it.
Yeah.
I'm not done with the grieving process, or the process of anger and all the other stuff that we have to go through. That I've got to be ready for the new normal.
Yeah, and that's all it was. I was not ready when I first started hearing those terms.
Yeah,
Well, thank you for sharing about being at Oklahoma City. I imagine that was traumatizing for yourself and other dispatchers and public safety officials. That was, I do remember that day, and I remember seeing it on the news and just being so shocked at that it happened and the scale of what happened.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, it just shows you what hate can do.
Hmm.
And this is not the podcast for it, but radicalization, whatever the radicalization is,
Hmm.
when we start hating things, or people or entities, that's a problem.
I agree. It is, and you're right, it's a conversation for another podcast and another day because it's so complex in some ways, and I think in some ways it's actually pretty simple, but yeah. So, I want to get back to something you were talking about, treating people after trauma, sort of dealing with difficult times, but also trying to find a way to prevent them in the some of these things in the first place if you can. When I think about prevention, I also think about like the role of our institutions and our system, however you want to define that, in protecting us and in providing resources to build our resiliency, et cetera. What do you think about the role of our systems and institutions in that?
Oh, wow. I'm just kind of at that question, just thinking, in late years in high school, maybe in college, when people do talk about health, do we do some education on resilience? Do we do some? Because I believe we're naturally resilient. The human body is resilient.
Mhm.
The human mind is tremendously resilient and powerful. But if we, let people know that, hey, bad things are going to happen in your life.
Yes.
And when bad things happen, you can overcome. You
Mhm.
can do X, Y, and Z. I think it'd be great that if we could in some of these basic health classes and include it. Instead
Yes.
of, eat well, eat and, do X, Y, and Z and exercise. Okay, well, yeah, talk a little bit about mental health as well.
Right. Right. Our physical health is only a piece of it, and our mental health is
Yeah.
important. So that education piece is important. I can see that. What would you say is an important lesson about resilience or maybe compassion that you've learned because of the work that you do?
One of the most important things that I once heard someone tell a group, talk it out or you will act it out.
Oh.
Talk it out or you will act it out. You talk it out some way. It doesn't have to be with a therapist. Some people don't want that. Some people aren't going to do it that way. Do you talk it out with a friend? Do you talk it out with a family member? Shoot, some people you can talk it out by writing it out.
Mhm.
But get those thoughts and feelings out. Another person once told me, you tell a secret, you cut it in half.
Mhm.
And so many times we bottle up emotions,
Yeah.
but by telling people about it, you cut it in half. You cut its power in half. And if you learn to talk it out some way with somebody, we don't bottle it out, and we don't act it out. And we act it out so many times in violence, abuse, alcohol, other substances,
Right.
and you start to see other mental health issues, et cetera, or physical health issues. So
Yeah.
that's, and sometimes when I teach, I said, if you remember anything else, you remember that if something happens, you find somebody to talk it out. And
Mhm.
sometimes in public safety, we don't talk it to other people because we don't want to burden our wife. We don't want to burden our husband. We don't want to burden our kids with
Mhm.
these problems. So we don't talk it out. We don't tell them what we saw or what we heard. We don't tell our coworkers the full extent of what happened.
Mhm.
And it just gets put in the bottle and put to the side. And sometimes it's years later the bottle explodes.
Yes. And you have trouble at a time when then you're not gonna be able to connect what's going on today with the original thing that you
Yeah,
were kind of squashing.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you for sharing that. We're getting close to the end here. So I'm curious, what is giving you hope these days?
I'm a half glass full guy.
Mhm.
I believe things are good,
Mhm.
even when things are bad. And I've been to the bottom, but I've been to the top.
Mhm.
And you can't enjoy the top unless you've been to the bottom.
Yes.
So I do have hope. I have hope in our country. I have hope in people.
Mhm.
I believe that there is a higher power. I do believe in God, and if certain things didn't happen in my life, I wouldn't be here where I am today.
Mhm.
The path I thought I wanted to take at some point in time that didn't happen. Well, if it would have happened, there's a good chance I wouldn't have met my wife. There's a good
Mhm.
chance I wouldn't have my son now. So
Right.
things put us on a path and we don't understand what it is, but we're on that path. Sometimes we don't like it,
Right. Right.
but we're still on it.
Right. Oh, thank you for that. There is a lot to be hopeful about, so I'm glad you shared that. Thank you. And what would you tell your 18-year-old self about resiliency?
You got this. Let it happen.
Mhm.
Enjoy the ride. There were times that were bad, but I've got a great life. I've got a great wife. I've got a great son. There is a road, and you got to walk the road.
Mhm.
And something else I learned a long time ago is there's almost nothing that can happen to me that hasn't happened to somebody else.
Mhm. Yes.
Virtually nothing. And if somebody else has already survived it,
Mhm.
the road's already there.
Yeah.
The road's already paved. I just got to walk it. Doesn't mean it's easy,
Right.
but I don't have to make a new road. I just have to walk the road that somebody else has already paved.
Right.
Because it's so easy in our world to think, well, it's only me that's going through this, or it's only me.
Yes.
And I've experienced in my life those 1 in 100,000, those 1 in a million. So, oh, you'll go, that this will never happen to you. Well, I've had 2 or 3 of those events happen to me, in my career in public safety that, you talk to people and they, people say, oh, well, most people go through their entire career without doing that. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've done it here. I've done it there. I've done it, I've done it everywhere. So, I don't, maybe I'm a black cloud.
No, I don't think you are, Tony. Not to stop you from what you're saying, but I think you just have a real understanding of how to deal with some of these things that happen in your life. And I like what you would tell your 18-year-old self about resiliency. So, and I very much like your thought about, this very few things that can happen to me as an individual haven't happened to somebody else.
Yeah.
And there is a way to get through it, and somebody else has gotten through it. Well, thank you for sharing, and thank you for this great conversation. I could talk to you for so much longer, but we're just about at the end of our time. How can our listeners reach you if they want to learn more about you or your work?
Yeah, the website for the company's www.publicsafetygroup.com,
Mhm.
or you can email me, tharrison@publicsafetygroup.com. You can reach out through the website or email me, and I'm more than happy to talk to anybody. If I can help in any way, I'm more than willing to help.
Excellent. Oh, thank you so much. And I'll put a link for both of those in the show notes so folks can more easily get in touch with you. Tony, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, thanks. All right, to our listeners, bye and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.